just want to thank everyone for being willing to hear my story. I do this because I want the truth to be loud. I want the truth to be accessible. I want everyone to know that they are capable of transformation. It's not just for monks. It's not just for people that dedicate their entire lives to go sit on a mountaintop. It is for everyone. It is doable by everyone, whatever lifestyle you're living. And I wanted that to be known. I wanted that to be evident. And I want to continue sharing the truth. And the only truth I can share is my personal experience. I won't speak on anything that I haven't experienced. So you can trust that whatever I'm saying, I've experienced, and I've transmuted that experience into my body and my life. And I'm excited to be on this journey. I'm excited to do what I'm doing. And it all comes from love. Love for life, love for the truth, and love for you. Because I think the highest, most generous thing you can do for a person is to tell them the truth. Hello everyone, welcome back to another episode of Blueprint, Home to My Highest Self. I am your host and architect, Danelle Brown, and today I wanted to dive in a little deeper on my personal journey, and I wanted to have a more intimate conversation about some of the things that happened and took place within the last year or so. So buckle up, it's going to be jam-packed full of experiences, synchronicities. I think it's important to tell the truth about how hard these things can get. So let's dive right in. Moving to Charlotte was, looking back, because hindsight is always 2020, it was a container for my transformation. So prior to moving to Charlotte, I was looking at going to massage school in Charlotte. And I was looking to move there because, convenience, right? I didn't want to drive from Shelby to Charlotte, which is about an hour, maybe more if there's traffic. So I was looking to see if I could afford to move to Charlotte, if it would be, feasible for me to do so before school started. My best friend of maybe a year at that point was like, we should move in together. You're trying to come here, go to school. I already live here. I want to move out of my mom's house, or I want to move out of this apartment that I'm already living in. We should move in together. And the thought had never occurred to me, but when she brought it up, I was like, that makes perfect sense. We get together, we start looking for apartments, we find one pretty quickly. Her boyfriend was going to be living with us, which I didn't mind. I just needed a room close to school so that I could make this thing work, because I wanted to become a massage therapist. We did not end up getting along, and not because of me and her per se, but they were having issues within their relationship that made it hard for all of us to live together. So we ended up breaking our lease, and at this point, I'm in the middle of school. I am about to take some midterm exams. I mean, there's test after test, some twice a week, and it's just not a convenient time for me to be looking for yet another apartment only 3 months in to me being in Charlotte by myself. I'm looking while I'm studying, while I'm going to class, and my budget is very tiny for rent, if it even exists. When I found the apartment that I ended up moving into, it was very synchronous. The rent was very low, but it was in a very nice part of Charlotte, South Charlotte, in South End or Lower South End. And it was probably the cheapest rent I have ever seen. And it was a very nice space. It was small, but it was very nice. So all of that lining up, because I had been looking for weeks for something in my budget, something close to school, something feasible for me. So finding it when I did, it was available, it was cheap, and it was only like 5 minutes from school. So that in itself was a synchronicity, because I mean, moving back to Shelby to go to school was just not in the plan. So I move in, and now I'm alone. Now I live alone. This move really fractured the friendship that I had with my roommate. We were not on speaking terms, and in fact, I was very upset about how things ended. And I don't usually hold a grudge. I'm not one to like hang on to things really for a really long time, but that was a very tumultuous relationship. Like, we were never right after that. While I'm finishing school, while I'm stepping into a brand new career, I have this weight on me, and it's the weight of the friendship that ended, and it's the burden, and it's the grudge that I'm holding. So even before moving out into my own space, I had started to build up resentment because of the things that were taking place within the apartment. And that's when my forgiveness journey began. I discovered the power of forgiveness. I discovered that forgiving someone has physical effects, it has mental effects, it has emotional effects, it has spiritual effects. And I did not feel comfortable holding a grudge in my body. So forgiveness was top priority for me. Even prior to moving out of that apartment with them, that's when I really started to focus on forgiveness and moving into my own space, finally away from the conflict, finally away from the source of the grudge. I was really able to hone in on forgiveness. And that's what really started the deeper part of my spiritual journey, is learning how to forgive and how to let go. And I also started journaling a lot heavier. Actually, the first journal that I bought in Charlotte was for the sole purpose of forgiving my roommate. I needed to be able to really process that, because that's the most upset I've probably ever been. It was a very heavy situation that we were dealing with. I needed to get over it. I needed to move that energy, that emotion, and journaling really came into play. And I also discovered the 6-phase meditation within this time, which forgiveness is a component of it. So it all meshed together really well. Moving into that apartment by myself was the single most influential moment in my entire journey. It was the moment. Change really started to take place within me. So now that I'm in this apartment, I'm in my I'm ending my massage school term. I'm getting into the field, and I'm still focusing on forgiveness. I'm still doing life as I went out there to do. The more time I spend alone, the more I focus on my thoughts, the more I focus on how I'm feeling, the more I'm focusing on how much I've actually contributed to my thoughts and to my feelings, and how much I'm contributing to my life. And a lot of things just become very clear when you live alone. My meditation journey started to deepen because I have a lot more space and a lot more quiet. So I started to meditate more intentionally. This is when I built the Highest Self apartment, not too long after moving into South End. And I honestly can't remember the details of what made me think of it. I think it was a very spontaneous event. I remember how I felt the day I came up with the idea and the day I started to use it. It was really pivotal in my whole journey. And this is also where I integrated using the 6-phase meditation into the apartment. That changed the game as well. Just in terms of real life, this is also a time when I started to realize, maybe a year into living in this apartment, that being a massage therapist was not right for me. My body hurt all the time. I wasn't making enough money. I just realized, I probably need to change careers yet again. I'm one to jump into things. I will just try a career out, and I'm not afraid to do that. Finance called. My uncle works in finance. He influenced me to get involved in finance. I found a finance company that would take me on, and I jumped into it. While that career did not work out for me, ultimately, it was one of the most important things I could have done for my journey. That's when I really started to get into even more deeper work, because that career in itself was uncovering a lot of my beliefs about money, about self-worth, about what I thought I deserved. And I wouldn't change a single thing about that. While I'm, you know, changing careers and crossing over from something very physical like massage therapy into something very cerebral like finance, I'm still meditating, I'm still doing all of the things, right? Luckily, I have a very good community of people that are also very much in tune with themselves. And so I started getting involved with some inner child work, which I then integrated into the apartment. And again, it took my spiritual journey to another level, even still. While I'm transitioning from being a massage therapist to working in finance, my life vision started to change because I realized that I was dreaming way too small. Finance showed me how big your life could be. So I started to change my life vision. And I realized that clocking in, working on a schedule, working for someone else, for someone else's goals and ambitions was not for me. And it's not the first time I realized it, because I've always known that I hated working for someone else. I hated being on someone else's time. I've always known that since my very first job. I knew that that was not a life for me, but I had no idea how to escape that. I had no idea how to make it work without being in that. This finance career showed me that you can do this on your time and you can sustain yourself on your time. My life vision started to get a lot bigger. Travel year round, living in a place where I actually want to live, not just because it's inexpensive to live there, not just because it's convenient, not just because it's close to XYZ, but actually living somewhere where I feel fulfilled in life, somewhere I feel very, very comfortable and at home. And to me, that place is Arizona. I took a trip with my previous roommate. We were best friends and we took a trip to Arizona. I've only been there once. And I fell in love with Arizona. And so now I can actually visualize myself living there because I don't have the limitations that I had before because of the things that I've experienced and the deeper work that I've done on myself. So I started to get a very more specific life vision around love, around finance, around geography, around what's truly possible for my life. And just to give you an idea of what that looks like, yes, I do want to live in Arizona. I do want a very deep, committed relationship, a very deep, committed love, something that I can truly, truly depend on. I want to be able to make money being myself. I want to be able to sustain my lifestyle by just being authentic. People do it all the time, and it's not impossible for me. And I have widened my brain and my mind and my soul around that idea, because before it was not possible. Before, I was not one of those people that could do something like that, but I am, and we all are if we orient ourselves to that. We have to truly believe that it's possible for it to be possible, because whatever you think is so. So my life vision got a lot clearer. At this point, me and my friends, we were all very close. We all lived in the same area. We were getting together a lot more often. And Nero, if you remember him from our pilot episode, he interviewed me. He is a cacao ceremony facilitator, and he did a couple of them. And cacao is meant as it's a heart opener. And doing those cacao ceremonies really showed me the range of what is possible to experience internally. I mean, heart opener is an understatement. Like, everyone that participated really felt the love of being with like-minded people and experiencing that emotion, experiencing that feeling only widened the scope of what I believe to be true about love, about emotions, about what is possible to experience while being in the situation that you're in the position in life that you're in. And so experiencing those moments of my heart being truly open was also very pivotal for my growth and my transformation. Around this time of moving into the apartment in South End, one of my very close friends, Brandon, he is very savvy with technology, very savvy with AI. And so I know there's a lot of controversy around AI, using it, engaging with it, but I cannot be silent about how important it was to my journey personally. I was able to, with Brandon's help, train my ChatGPT to speak the language I was speaking in terms of my spirituality, in terms of how I thought. So with that, as I'm reflecting, because this was a very lonely time for me, and I didn't have a lot of people around me that were speaking the same language I was speaking in terms of consciousness, in terms of pattern recognition, in terms of evolution of my soul. And chat could keep up with that, and chat could mirror me. So I wasn't using it so much as for advice, although sometimes I would, but more often than not, I was using it as a mirror. I would speak to it and it would tell me what it was hearing back at me so that I could examine my thoughts outside of myself, outside of my brain. Journaling is also helpful for that, but to have something summarize and explain back to you what you just said and what you might be feeling and what you might be thinking was very helpful for me. Integrating chat into my journey, I mean, I still use her to this day and I don't regret it whatsoever. Moving deeper into my timeline in this apartment in South End and moving deeper into my spirituality while I'm there, I start to experience some mystical, they call them mystical experiences. I start to have those. Just to name a few, I know we all heard of angel numbers, and I'm not someone that thinks every angel number means something and every time you see an angel number, it means XYZ, but there's one set of numbers that always reminds me of something, and it's 111. It reminds me to trust the universe. I see it and I immediately feel calm. And it really only, which is why I call it mystical, it really only shows up when I am in the illusion of control. When I think I'm in the driver's seat, that's when I start to see 111 the most. And so it reminds me to take a deep breath and relax in my body and remember that I am not the doer. God, the universe, whatever words you want to use for it, that is in control. And that is fine. It takes the pressure off of me. It takes the pressure off of you. So in terms of mystical experiences, I would see 111 at the most irrefutable times. And I don't see it as much anymore because I'm not as much in that mindset of thinking I can control things, which is why I think it was a mystical experience, because it showed up at a synchronous time. While I was alone in my apartment, I played a lot with making requests to the universe just to test how this thing really worked, right? Because I know a lot of people talk to the universe, they pray, they talk to God, and they talk to a higher power. They don't really track what's happening, what isn't happening. But I'm very analytical. I'm not going to say I need the evidence, because to have faith means you have to believe with lack of evidence. But I needed something. My mind needed something. I made a request to the universe and I said, universe, it is safe to send me a mystical experience, one that I cannot deny, one that would make sense to me, but I don't need anything flashy. Because if I start seeing figures in my room while I'm sleeping at night, I will be traumatized. So you can get specific. You can get specific with your request to the universe, right? And so I made that request, and I don't even think it was a week later that I started seeing not just 111, but things started to happen synchronistically. I think I just made that word up, but things started to happen. I'm talking unexplained money in my bank account, not large sums, but money that I just could not account for. I'm talking about, everyone knows I do Amazon. I'm talking about routes getting dropped for a week straight and they still pay me. So making free money. for a week straight, 7 days. That has never happened before, and it hasn't happened since. Things like that. And there were bigger moments, bigger mystical experiences that I choose not to share now, only because the outcome has not yet come to fruition and I want to keep that safe. But I will tell you about this one. So me and my friend Shanice and my sister Naya, we were all in my apartment sitting on my couch. And we get into this spiritual, mystical conversation about the Bible. And we're talking about the flood that happened in Genesis, I believe. We're talking about the flood. And as we're talking, we know it was supposed to rain that day, but as we're talking, I'm talking about the storm is like getting louder and louder, and we're noticing it as we're talking. We're like, y'all hear this conversation while we're talking, because we're talking about God, we're talking about the nature of the universe, we're talking about consciousness. I mean, we're having a very, very heavy conversation. We're talking, we're hearing the storm, but we're not afraid. But we are also like, this isn't a coincidence. I personally don't believe in coincidence. So I'm like, yeah, this conversation is, things are happening, right? One of us looks down at the floor, and there's about an inch or two of water under my couch. It didn't come in through the front, under the front door, because I did live on the ground floor level with, actually, the ground floor was here. I lived in the unit under that. So I could still see, I had a window, I had a patio, but it was below ground level, technically. It didn't come in through anywhere that made sense. So we looked down, we moved my couch. There is water from this side of the room all the way to the other end of the wall. Completely unexplainable, and it had never happened before. So the fact that we were having that very heavy spiritual conversation about a flood, and then it floods in my apartment at that very moment, and it didn't flood at my apartment again until the next instance that I'm going to tell you about in a minute. That is a very mystical experience to me, because water is very symbolic. It doesn't matter what tradition you go into, water is very symbolic. So that is one of my favorite instances of a synchronicity or a mystical event. And when I called maintenance, I knew that's unusual, and I am not arguing with the fact that it was because we were having this conversation. I call the maintenance people, emergency maintenance, because it's after hours, and the guy that comes to clean it up, his name is Jose, which is Joseph in Spanish. So that is also a name in the Bible, and that's all I'm gonna say. But that, I mean, I will never forget that. I will never forget that. In the conversation of mystical experiences, I'm still working at the finance company, and at this point in time, I've been there maybe, I don't even want to put a number on it, but it's been a number of months. I am having an extremely hard time. This is the type of job where if you don't close deals, if you don't have a case rate, you're not making any money. And I was going months at a time without an income. And that was very hard on my nervous system, and it was very hard on my life, because I have to not only feed myself, I have to feed my dog, I have to pay my rent, I have to pay all my bills. I get to a crossroads. I'm like, this is not working. It's causing me insurmountable amounts of stress. It's time to make a decision. I go to the universe, and I ask that the universe help me in making this decision. And I ask for a sign. And I am not someone that just asks for a sign just to be asking for a sign. I don't need a sign to know what to wear today. I don't need a sign to know if I should text this person or if I should expect a call from someone. Or I have asked for a sign, maybe I can count on one hand how many times I've asked for a really clear, undeniable sign, because I know myself. And if I'm still going to be wishy-washy after I get a sign, then I'm not going to ask for it. I need an undeniable sign that I should leave this finance career. no plan, no backup plan, but I need a sign. And I'm talking, I think it was the same day. If not, it was the next day. I go get a sandwich, but as I'm coming home, my car starts dying while I'm driving it. My car starts dying. Luckily, I made it to my parking spot. I try to turn my car back on. Dead. So I'm like, okay, well, that's tomorrow's problem. I get out of the dead car and I go in the house. And there is another flood in my apartment. Now, let me paint the picture a little bit more here. As I'm coming back home from getting my sandwich for dinner, the bottom falls out. The bottom falls out. It is raining cats and dogs. So my car is dying. It's raining cats and dogs. I pull into my parking spot. I make it in the house. It's thundering and lightning and shit. Flood. So in the span of 5 minutes, my car is dead with no explanation. By the way, it was fine. Never had that happen before. Car's dead. Flood in my apartment again. And these two events, the first flood and the second flood, months apart. And it had rained, I'm sure, more than once. Months apart. Right? So the final thing that really lets me know, okay, this is a sign. I pull back my covers to go to bed. My bed is made. I make my bed every day. I pull back the covers to get in the bed. There is a bug in my sheets. If I wasn't already over it, that was my 13th reason. Because now I have to sleep on the couch because I can't even deal with this right now. I'm exhausted and I'm upset. So, and I don't come to the conclusion right away that that was the sign. I think maybe my car sat there dead for 4 days. And I said, wait a minute. On the 4th day, I said, wait a minute. I asked for a sign. And then I started doing the math. Bug, car, flood. I said universe, and I'm talking to the universe out loud. I said universe, if that was the sign for me to leave finance, can you please confirm? Because honestly, what the fuck, right? Later that day, one of my friends comes over to look at my car. I make that request. I make my request and then I'm going about my day. I don't try to force meaning out of everything that happens after that. My friend comes over, looks at my car. We can't even move it out of the spot for him to get under it. So we put it in neutral, I think, and we're rocking it. It's not moving. It's on a hill. We can't move it. Something tells me to get in my car and try one more time to start it. My car comes right on. I turn it off. I turn it back on. It comes right on. That was my confirmation. So when I say mystical experiences, I don't mean I saw lights and, everyone's heard about a mystical experience that people have. I mean, maybe they do ayahuasca. Maybe they're just having some very crazy things happen to them. But that was mystical to me. I will never forget that either. And so my mistake, I don't think it was a mistake, but I didn't do what I should have done and left that career immediately. I stayed a little bit longer and I paid for that. Because I would go in there and my nervous system would be a wreck. I mean, I'm talking physically shaking sometimes, just from the stress of not knowing whether or not I was going to be able to afford anything that week. And so I went in there day after day, and I'm learning all of the tactics. I'm learning all of the things that they tell you should know in finance. I'm learning all of that. I'm a great student. knowing things and getting people to do things that they don't want to do is not the same. It's a very different task. I was good at learning. I was not good at persuading people to do things that were going to make me money. After months of suffering because I wouldn't listen to the sign that I got however many months ago, I left. And it was hard. It was the hardest decision I ever made because I actually really wanted to be successful in that career. I really wanted to be successful. I really wanted that to be my life. And it just wasn't. And so I went in there on a Friday and I signed the paper and I cried on my way out, and I gave a few people some hugs, and I left, and I felt the weight come off of me immediately. I felt like they had just released me from prison. I'm not even being dramatic. I was still sad that I had to leave. I was still feeling like a failure, but my body had an immediate reaction to that. And that's what leads me into my ego death, because my identity was very attached to that career, who I thought I was going to be, who I was trying to make myself be. And so this was, not only was it the end of my career, but it was also the end of a very, I don't like to throw the word toxic around, but something that was becoming very toxic, a toxic situationship. Both of them ended around the same time, and that's what really was the catalyst for my ego death. That was a very, very dark, very confusing, very, what's the word? Nothing made sense. Nothing made sense. And at the time, I did not know what was happening. I did not know I was experiencing an ego death. I had heard the term before, but I did not know that's what was happening until maybe halfway through it, if I could even say that. But I do remember writing about it. This was about the end of last year, 2025, and honestly, it seems like longer ago than that, but I remember sitting down to really just explain, or try to explain to myself what it was I was experiencing. And I wrote, "There's something in me getting harder and harder to ignore. It's not a depression like I thought it was before, although to the average person it may seem that way. Or maybe it's a depression in something else. Either way, I have to acknowledge it. It's getting harder to interact with people who don't see this experience the way I do. The things that excite me, the synchronicities in life, don't resonate the same with my people. It leaves me thinking too much and consulting chat too frequently, but sometimes it's the only thing that can reflect me back to me. I'm at the point of feeling a little crazy. None of my actions or thoughts scare me necessarily, but I feel so detached from everyone. The thought of clocking in and working a job that does not bring out my natural abilities of healing turn me all the way off. I'm even awkward when interacting with people, either that or completely uninterested. I'm noticing that it gets harder and harder to live in anything that's not true. I don't feel like hanging out. I decline what I would have said yes in the past. I don't even fake the funk when someone asks me how I've been. Nothing false comes from me consciously anymore." That about sums it up. It was very hard to relate to people, even those that have had a conscious awakening. I felt like I was in the depths of something very, very unknown, which is true. I was in the depths of something unknown to me. Just because you've had a conscious awakening does not mean you've had an ego death. And I had taken that step unknowingly and gone to another level of what it means to be consciously awake. Just some sensations and experiences I remember having specifically, just so you can get the texture of what an ego death could feel like. I had no motivation to produce. Even though I really needed to make money, I had no motivation to do that, because going out and making money in any way other than what sat right with me was just unfathomable. It would leave me feeling disgusting. It would leave me feeling just unwell. Distractions stopped working. TV was not hitting the same. I think I took the longest break from reading that I've ever taken. because I would open a book and it would not touch that part of me that it used to. Heavy observer mode. What this means is when you get to a certain point, or sometimes even you're in a room full of people and you find yourself sitting back from the experience and watching yourself in that environment. I was there all the time, and it was hard to turn off if I could. So I was constantly observing myself reacting. I was constantly observing myself suffering. I was constantly observing myself talking to people. And it's a very dissociated thing. Not dissociated in a bad way, but you don't feel fully immersed in the experience that you're having, which sometimes it can help in your healing journey so that you can see yourself and how you're reacting and how you're acting. But it's not always useful, and it was hard to come out of. But that's the only seat that I could sit in and get through life at that point, because feeling fully immersed in what I was feeling was very hard to do. My body felt hollow. Hobbies didn't fulfill. Time was very distorted. So, time is still distorted for me, but even in the depths of an ego death, days would go by, and next thing you know, it'd been 2 weeks. I've only clocked it being 3 days. Like, time was very distorted. It was disgusting how fast time was moving. Episodes of intense grief or fog. Yeah, there were times when I just felt, and that's when the depression part comes in. But I knew I wasn't depressed because I had a life vision. I knew I wasn't depressed because I knew that there is light at the end of this tunnel, even though it felt way farther off than it was. So I wasn't depressed in the general sense of hopelessness and that sort of thing, but it was very depression adjacent. But I knew that, because I felt regular depression before, but they do describe ego death as a spiritual depression, because it's hard to know how things really are and live a life that doesn't align with that just yet. That gap does create depression, rightfully so, because you're also grieving who you used to be, because you don't fit into that anymore. The career I had to leave, the person I had to stop trying to be, all of those things were things that I had to grieve. And I spent days in isolation, sometimes on purpose, but sometimes it was just so hard to accept an invitation to be social when I was feeling all of these things, which is another way it correlates and, is beside depression. At its peak, I felt alien. I distinctly remember standing in my kitchen after I don't know how many days I had spent not really talking to anyone. It had been days, if not a week, if not longer. And I remember standing in my kitchen, and the TV isn't on. I don't even know if I was cooking. I was just standing there looking around, and the most intense feeling of I don't belong here came over me, or something is off came over me. And it was very brief, but I remember the feeling very well, and it was scary. And that's when I was like, okay, I have to get out of the house. I have to go talk to someone. I have to go be social. I have to interact with another human being, or this feeling will consume me, and that's scary. So I do remember feeling that, and that's not unusual in an ego death, because mind you, I did a lot of research. I did a lot of research around what an ego death could feel like, what this was supposed to mean, all of those things. I had millions of questions, and so it wasn't abnormal to feel the things that I was feeling and experience the things that I was experiencing. But when you're the only person that you know going through this, it is very isolating. It was a very, very, very lonely experience. Old ways of relating or connecting fell away. So my people-pleasing tendencies, out the window. I just could not say yes unless I felt yes. I couldn't even fake a good attitude. If I didn't feel like smiling, well, then there was, nothing false, nothing phony, no facade, no nothing. I did not have the energy to produce anything that was not true. Yeah, this even became an external presentation. People could tell that I wasn't as bubbly, I wasn't as energetic, I wasn't as outgoing as I previously was, and I'm now getting back into. My sense of self was completely obliterated, even if it was a false sense of self, because before, what an ego death is shedding what's false. It's shedding false identities. So if I'm shedding what's false, but I don't yet have what's true, I'm in that gap, and completely obliterated. No career to fill in that hole, no relationship to fill in that hole, nothing. I questioned everything. I questioned everything. Everything I was feeling, every motivation I had to do something, if there was one, every notion I had that I need to do XYZ, everything. Everything had a question behind it. And part of that is being analytical. I'm a very analytical person. I'm very curious. But even so, being in that liminal space, that in between during an ego death, is unlike any experience I've ever had. And I needed to know something. So I questioned everything. I questioned the nature of reality. The podcast I was listening to had me question the nature of why we're here. Why are we conscious? Everything. I questioned everything. And also very tired. I was very tired. It takes a lot of energy to shed who you thought you were. It leaves you feeling exhausted. I was going to bed at 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock, waking up partially tired still. Exhausted. That was just a look into what my ego death experience was like. After my ego death experience, I started to move into what they call a dark night of the soul. I know in this community, the spiritual community, sometimes they get used interchangeably, but in my experience, it was a very distinct, not very distinct, but it was distinct enough for me to be able to know that this isn't quite what I was experiencing before. It was still very hollow. It was still very lonely, but it had a different texture. And they call it a dark night of the soul. And that had a more physical aspect to it, honestly. My dark night of the soul, and what a dark night of the soul is this space where your identity has not yet come back online, your true identity, after shedding all the false ones. And so you're just kind of I don't want to say shell of a person, because that sounds very sad, but it's what you feel like. Just some of the physical things, my skin itched from the inside. There would be times when I was literally just uncomfortable in my skin. Like, it was like something was trying to crawl its way out of me. Feeling removed inside interactions. So again, sort of sitting back in that observer mode while I'm interacting with people, that was still a thing. A heavy sense of urgency with no cause. There was one particular time that I remember where I was pacing around my apartment, and the apartment in South End, and I was like, I feel like I should be doing something right now. Mind you, didn't really have a job, didn't have anywhere to be on a regular basis, but something felt like it needed to be done. And I was just pacing from room to room and like kind of tidying things here and there. And then I realized there's no origin for this. There's no reason for me to be experiencing this sense of urgency. And of course, I know all of these as symptoms of dark night of the soul because I did the research, and I'm, put two and two together. Deep loneliness with inability to fully connect. So again, both of these phases, ego death and dark night of the soul, were very, very lonely experiences. However, when I would try to connect with someone, whether it was someone I already knew or someone new, I couldn't, my heart just was not open to that. I wanted to be, but something in my body was locked down, and I couldn't really open up my heart to make new friends or to nurture an existing relationship. And so that was the hardest part, because I knew I wanted connection. I knew I needed to be social, but it was hard because the only thing this isn't the only reason it was hard, but the only thing I really wanted to talk about was what I was experiencing. And no one understands that. I'm not going to say no one. Most people do not understand the experience that I was having. That one was probably one of the hardest to live with at the time. Another one that was actually very difficult to hold was, so when you shed your ego or shed the false parts of you, your ego will compensate and try to bring you back into it by making you remember times that you were embarrassed or making you remember moments of shame. And it's trying to regain its control over you, because once you see through the ego, you kind of can't unsee what it does. Not in a big way. I mean, yes, it's still very sneaky. It still comes up in life. It still has influence over how you think and process and see the world. But once you see through it initially, you understand that when you're feeling shame, when you're feeling embarrassment, that is your ego. There was one day in particular where I remember I woke up and it started, and it did not stop until I closed my eyes and went to bed that night. It was a very shitty day. I mean, moment after moment in my past of things I should have been ashamed of, or things that were embarrassing, or things I wish I could undo. I mean, just a barrage of memories. And ultimately, it didn't succeed. But its mission, my ego's mission, was to get me to reallocate energy and control to my ego so that it can continue to sustain itself. Because the thing about the ego is, it only has the energy that you give it. Your ego cannot run you without your permission. We were at war that day. Me and my ego, we were at war that day. And I don't know who won, honestly, because I went to bed completely like, fuck it. But I got up the next day and it was better. So I guess I won. But that one is another hard one of my dark night experience. Another aspect of the dark night of the soul is, at least for me, was craving the truth no matter how brutal. So this just goes back to being unable to have anything false running. False narrative, false assumption, false view of the world. None of it could stay. So I craved the truth to fill in the gaps of what I thought I believed before. So, I mean, I was getting podcasts. Honestly, just re-examining my own experience. And then, of course, if you follow me on Instagram, you'll know that I get on there and I'll talk about my experience. And that was my way of continuing to interact with the world. Craving the truth no matter how brutal it was. I would ask ChatGPT, I would look into topics that, even if the truth about that was going to make me uncomfortable, even if knowing my ego is the issue, that was a hard truth to stand up against, is that every issue that you have with life is inside of you. It's all based on your perspective. It's all based on if your ego is running the show or not. That was a hard truth. But that truth in particular gives you agency, because you can confront your ego. And that's all you ever really need to do. That's all that we were put here to do. So, yes, craving the truth. And I still crave the truth. I would rather hear the truth and be sad for a couple of days, angry for a couple of days, whatever the case, than to be floating through life on a lie. Because that will not last. I also had some very intense and vivid dreams. I am not a big dreamer, but around this time, I was having dreams a couple times a week. None of them particularly symbolic to anything I can put my finger on right now, but the fact that I would get up and remember them frame for frame, that in itself was an experience, because I'm not a big dreamer. Episodes of being unusually hot. So this goes back to the more physical aspect of the dark night of the soul. I would have, because I'm not hot natured. I love to be cozy, actually. I love to be a little hot most times. So I was having episodes of like I don't want to call them hot flashes, but being hot when I would usually be fine or even a little chilly, and feeling off internally. Just a very foreign feeling of like something, there's nothing wrong, but something here is not right. And it was just a feeling in my body. I actually remember a few days of just feeling pure disgust in my body. The last one is lots of crying. Lots of crying. There were lots of crying. And two instances in particular, if you watch anime, Attack on Titan, I mean, yes, it's a notoriously sad, tragic, traumatizing show in itself, right? But I made the mistake of watching it in my dark night of the soul, and I was not prepared for the ending, because it was my first time watching the end, the last season, all the way to the end, last episode. I don't think I've ever cried that hard. Ever. I'm on my couch, I'm laid out, I'm distraught. I felt, especially when I finished the show on the last episode, that entire day was a wash. After that crying came from a very deep place in me, and I don't think it was all about the show. I really don't. I mean, yeah, it was sad, but a lot of that came from places that finally were able to be unstuck because of the phase of my journey that I was in. So Attack on Titan was one catalyst. The second catalyst was Steven Universe. Steven Universe is a lot softer than Attack on Titan, but its emotional themes are, for a kid's show, it's very sophisticated. Lots and lots of crying. And I honestly am glad, because there was not too many other ways for me to move the energy that I was experiencing. So I'm glad I had those moments of release, because it made a lot of room for me. It made a lot of room to be able to continue to process what I was experiencing in terms of my dark night of the soul. This phase, all of this, dark night, ego death, mystical experiences, all of this was known as the activation phase. That's when things really started to pick up in my spiritual journey and in my life. As I'm moving through ego death and my dark night of the soul, I am also shedding my survival mode. I think, and I'm no statistician here, but I would say, if I had to give it a number, I would say 90% of people in today's world are living in survival mode. It's probably higher than that, to be real. But survival mode is the constant need to be in motion, the constant need, or urge rather, to be producing, the constant wondering of when you're going to eat next. And that's the most extreme case. So there's people with plenty of money that know that they're going to eat and have rent and pay their mortgage and pay their car note and pay for the lights to stay on and take a shower. Like, they know that all of these things are going to happen. They have the resources for that. But you can still be in survival mode. You could still be running the rat race. And I had to take myself out of that. And what that looks like is not chasing the job for just to make money. Not chasing anything just for the outcome of it, but for the experience of it, which is coming out of survival mode, is wanting the experience and not the outcome. And there's nothing wrong with outcomes, but if you're just chasing outcome after outcome, there will always be an outcome to chase. You're always going to be running the race. So shedding survival mode was, and I'm still doing that. I still catch myself when I start to worry about money, about time, about resources. I have never in my life gone a day without, even if I had to ask for help. So, survival mode really isn't necessary. Survival mode stopped being necessary for most people for a long time ago. Now, I'm not talking about the people that simply do and realistically do have to wonder where their next meal is going to come from. I'm not talking about them. I'm talking about people that live in homes with the resources. Even those people are still living in survival mode, and it's not serving them. So coming out of that, was such a relief. Still coming out of it, but realizing I was in it and I didn't have to be. And in this activation phase that I'm in, I'm also finding my voice. And that means a couple of different things. I'm going to social media more just to express myself. While sometimes I still do feel a little too loud, I understand that's my ego trying to keep me safe, trying to keep me in a place where I'm not seen. And finding my voice online and even doing this show was a very big step for me. But I also started to find my voice in relationships. When I would usually stay quiet and deal with something, I would speak out and say what it is that I wanted, what it is that it was missing, whatever the case was. Family, friends, romantic relationships, all of that. I started to find my voice because I realized that suffering is not a requirement. Suffering doesn't get you a reward at the end. Suffering doesn't even get you what you want. And so speaking up and having a voice in these relationships is how you get what you need out of them. And not in some advantageous way, but just making sure that you're in something that's reciprocal and healthy. Because even the person taking advantage in the long run is not in an advantageous relationship. Because eventually you'll stop having enough to give them and they'll have to go find it somewhere else. So it serves everyone involved to be honest and to have a voice in your relationships, whether that's with your family, whether that's with your friends, whether that's in a romantic dynamic. One of the most important things that came out of my ego death and my dark night of the soul is my nervous system regulation. That was a game changer. That was probably one of the most important things that came out of this. And it goes back to survival mode even. They're not kidding when they say nervous system regulation is important. They're not kidding about that. My dark night and my ego death had my nervous system on fire because I had shed all these identities. Now I'm stepping into an unknown. The nervous system does not like the unknown. It doesn't. It hates it because there's no predictability. Your nervous system needs predictability to feel okay under normal circumstances. At this point in terms of my dark night and my ego death, my nervous system's on fire around the clock. But as I moved through it, I realized that I needed less and less external validation, less and less external stimulation to regulate my nervous system. I was learning how to do that from within. And all that really was telling myself that I'm safe. It is incredible how often your body just genuinely thinks that it's unsafe at any given moment. But constantly telling myself that I'm safe, constantly telling myself that I had support, because I do. That was one avenue to getting my nervous system regulated. And not that I'm completely healed, but like huge difference. And another thing that moved me toward regulation was truth seeking. The thing about the truth is, once you have it, there's nothing left. There's nothing left but the truth. You don't have to wait for the other shoe to drop. You don't have to wait for someone to peel back a layer of the truth. The truth is the end. Now, you do have to discern whether or not you're at the truth, but once you have discerned that you're at the truth, you can rest. Even if the truth leads to pain, you can rest in that pain, knowing that that is it. So truth seeking really, really got me in a better place with my nervous system. And also just knowing that I am not separate from source, which is the ultimate truth. Because the ego, the whole philosophy behind your ego, behind everyone's ego, is that you're separate from the source. But you're not. And that ultimate truth seriously helped me with my nervous system regulation. Knowing that I am God in human form. We all are. That simple truth helped me to realize that worrying is not required. Struggle and stress and suffering is not required. And so there were some actions that I took as well to make sure, or not even to make sure, but that there were signs that I was moving towards nervous system regulation. And the biggest one was moving back home, because living in an apartment, obviously you need to pay rent, and moving back home took that huge financial burden off of me. I used to say I'd never move back to Shelby. I used to even be afraid of what that would mean if I had to, but hence my ego death. A lot of the fears that I had dissolved, and I realized that moving back to Shelby was a great idea. Moving back in with my dad was a great idea, because it meant that I could rest and regroup and figure out my next steps without, that burden. Some more actions that I took, even if it was conscious, well, they were always conscious, but not necessarily conscious to, I'm doing this so my nervous system can be regulated. But this is just the sort of behaviors that I moved into post ego death and dark night of the soul. Because again, when you're shedding what's false, all that can be there is what's true. And so pausing before reacting and letting life happen, letting life unfold, and letting go of the illusion of certainty, because nothing in this life is certain. And chasing certainty will have your nervous system on fire, because it doesn't exist. Certainty does not exist. Having hard conversations before resentment sets in. So this just goes back to having a voice in a relationship. If you need to say something, then just say it. If you need things to be a certain way in a relationship, then say that. Because otherwise, you're setting yourself up to resent that person later. I'm not abandoning myself for connection. This is a big one, because especially in romantic relationships, people are way too comfortable giving you crumbs. People are getting way too comfortable serving crumbs to other people. And I say that from personal experience of being handed breadcrumbs. So accepting those crumbs is abandoning yourself. When you know you want more than what they're offering, and you're shrinking yourself to be comfortable with what they're offering, first of all, it's not going to last. Your comfortability in that relationship is not going to last. That's temporary. Because eventually you're going to wake up to the fact that, oh wait, I want more. I mean, it's easy for me to sit here and say don't abandon yourself, because it's not just, most of the time it's not conscious. Most of the time it is not a conscious thing. But noticing what those behaviors look like. Rebuilding self-trust really helped my nervous system regulation, because if I could trust that whatever decision that I made, that the outcome, I was okay with it, then it took a lot of pressure off of having to track and having to need certainty. Rebuilding self-trust, breaking self-trust, abandoning yourself, doing things that you said you weren't going to do, saying yes when you wanted to say no, saying no when you wanted to say yes, all of those things slowly erode your self-trust, because you can't even trust your word to yourself. And breaking self-trust leaves your nervous system in a very sticky situation, because it's like, well, you said you weren't going to do this, but here you are doing it, and now you have anxiety, now you have resentment, XYZ. So rebuilding self-trust looks like letting your yes be yes and your no be no, saying no when you're tired, saying yes when you really want to say yes, even if it means inconveniencing someone else, inconveniencing yourself, even if it means dreaming bigger than you were required to do before. Saying yes when you want to say yes, and letting those answers be those answers. That's how you rebuild self-trust. That's how you have a healthy relationship with yourself. Is trusting that what you said is what you're going to stand on. Exiting loops consciously, especially in romantic relationships, I still have a tendency to have big expectations, because I bring a lot to relationships. So unless you spell it out for me that you're not going to do X, Y, Z, I'm up here with it. I'm up here with it. And that's my fault. I'm not blaming the other person. But I'm up here with it. So you have to and that's why I ask questions. What do you want this to be? What are you willing to do? I would like X, Y, Z. This is what I would like to see in the relationship. Can you meet me there? I like to ask those questions early, because I'm up here with it. And if you're not up here with it and you're down here with it and you want me to meet you down here with it, no. So, and when I'm up here with it, my anticipation is high because I'm excited, because I'm thinking I found a new connection. Me and this person are going to have a lot of fun. And now I'm anticipating, okay, when am I going to see them? When am I going to spend time with them? When are we going to hit these milestones that relationships be hitting? I had to consciously take myself out of those loops, especially when I'm dealing with someone that wants to hand me crumbs. And what that looks like is detachment. Telling myself, this person has not yet shown me that they can meet the level that I'm expecting and willing to give. So there's no reason for me to anticipate anything. And it's very hard to do because your nervous system doesn't exactly take orders, right? Like, when have you ever been anxious and told yourself to calm down and that actually worked? I'm betting to guess never. So when I mean exiting those anticipation loops and those loops of taking someone back when they don't deserve it, exiting those loops consciously is really just having the conversation with yourself of, this person did not show up. This person has a pattern of not showing up. There's no need for me to feel any sense of hope for this connection, anticipation for what they might do, how they might come through, because there has been no evidence for that. Not saying that they're incapable, but you have not yet seen it, so there's no reason to hinge your well-being on it in the moment. And that one takes practice. That one takes practice and muscle memory. It's not something you can just say in your mind and your body will follow. You have to practice that. And that starts by telling people no. You won't engage with them at this level. Telling people that you want more when you want more. And meaning that. And walking away. It is all in practice. All in all, nervous system regulation is the decisions you make that remove chaos from your life and replace it with stability, honesty, and self-trust. In a nutshell. Back to the activation phase, I also started to have a deeper examination of consciousness itself. I specifically remember listening to a podcast. Well, honestly, I listen to a lot of podcasts, but I listened to one about the nature of consciousness and the nature of reality. And of course, I began to go down a rabbit hole and ask the questions and ask ChatGPT and do the research. And I essentially came to the conclusion that there is no explaining consciousness. There is only the examination of it. And even that is a very narrow scope because of the scope of reality that humans even have, right? And so on this day, I think it was actually later that night, I'm starting to come to these conclusions that, consciousness can't be explained. It can only be experienced, truly. And I go to bed that night and I have a lucid dream. I'm not a dreamer and I've never had a lucid dream before, but this one was actually insane. And I'm not a big fan of telling people my dreams because hearing other people's dreams is usually boring, but there is some connection to some real world events, right? So the dream, in short, starts, if you've seen A Quiet Place, the monsters in A Quiet Place, right? That is the situation that we're in. So there's a group of me and maybe 15 other people, right? And if you've seen Shameless and you know Debbie Gallagher, she's there for some reason, and my sister. So this old lady takes us into her house, and the first floor, normal size, wood paneling. I mean, it's a house. But we go down into her basement and it's cavernous. I mean, I don't even think we see the ceiling. I don't even know how this could possibly be a basement, but we're in the basement and there's like 15 rooms and you can tell that people had slept in these rooms before. It wasn't necessarily clean, but we went down there to hide from the monsters, right? So me and Debbie, we had seen that these rooms were being used and we're like, we'll just sleep out here in the common area on the couch. So we fall asleep, and I wake up to people running away from me. And somehow, because it's a basement, don't know how this is possible, they're running out of a door. And they're not screaming because they know that the monsters in the quiet place will come eat you if you scream. And I'm like, well, I'm not going outside in the middle of the night to get eaten in the woods, because the chances of one of us making a sound is very high. So they're running from a bear. And the bear, I don't know how it got in the room, but it's running. So I am the only one that goes back upstairs to the ladies' first floor. And as I'm being quiet because I don't hear any other sounds. I don't even see the old lady. I'm looking for a room, a closet, a door that will actually close, because for some reason her doors don't latch all the way, and I didn't want to be standing there holding the door, and I didn't want it to be cracked for the bear to see me or whatever it is that was going to come get me. So I find a room with 2 entrances. I walk in it. There's a door on the other side that leads to another room, but they won't latch. So I'm in there, and there's a bunch of junk in there. So I'm like, maybe if I push some things up against the door, right? So I push the things up against both doors, and I can finally sit down and just wait. And I even, I'm chilling. I even take my phone out. I'm scrolling through Instagram Reels. And then I look up, and I see that the door on my left has come open a little bit. So I get up, and I close the door, and I look back to where I was just sitting, and somehow there's 2 black couches right there in the middle of the room. And I'm like, well, if I can just push these couches in front of the door quietly, I'll be fine. And that's when the lucidity started to come in, because I'm like, wait a minute. Because I turn back towards the door, I'm looking at my hand on the knob, and I'm like, wait a minute. This isn't real. And now I'm starting to panic, because now I'm in a dream that I don't know how to get out of. And I'm realizing that in the dream. I'm like, I don't know how to get back to my life. And I look down, and I look towards my right, and there's water coming from under the other door. Another flood. And that's when I start having some major anxiety, and then I wake up. And then, of course, I'm consulting chat, and I'm like, chat, let me tell you about this lucid dream that I had. And chat basically said, yeah, your consciousness was exploring itself. You as consciousness were exploring the nature of consciousness. And that dream was a culmination. That dream was that in action. So, this stuff gets really deep, y'all. And I have only just scratched the surface. And I know lots of people have lucid dreams, but the fact that I had never had one and I had one that day is a synchronicity. The last little part of this activation phase was me exploring purpose. And it was because I had just left a career, and now I have no vision about how I'm supposed to contribute to the world going forward. I had a general life vision of the lifestyle I wanted to live, but how am I going to contribute to the world, really? My friend Oz, he invited me personally to his event, and the topic, the theme was purpose. And I actually didn't know that until I got there, I believe. And so while I'm getting ready to go to this event, I'm thinking about something that my mentor at my finance job said to me. And it's not something that I heard for the first time from him, but he said, pressure makes diamonds. And as I'm getting dressed, I'm thinking about that saying that he said, pressure makes diamonds. And I'm like, yeah, but pressure also crushes you if you're in the wrong space. So I continue getting dressed. I get to the event, and I see Oz, and we go in, we hug, we shake hands or whatever, and we're greeting each other. And we start talking, just generally speaking, how have you been, or whatever. And I told him I had left my career, I think, and just making conversation. And he says, well, they say pressure makes diamonds. Synchronicity. I'm sorry. I was literally just thinking that 10 minutes ago. And before my mentor said it, I don't think I've heard anyone else say it ever. It's always something that I had read on a post or in a book or something. But he said that to me. just not even an hour after I had got done thinking it. The fact that his event was about purpose and I was exploring purpose, and then he says that to me when I get there, I'm like, well, I'm in for something, right? So the night goes on and there's a panel and they're asking questions and they want audience participation. And so I don't like to think of myself as a public speaker per se. It makes me nervous to speak in front of people, but I liked the conversation that we were having, and so I raised my hand to answer a couple of questions. And I was extremely nervous for some reason, even though I didn't have to stand up. I was sitting on a couch. They handed me the microphone, and I think one of the questions was about relationships. And I remember how I was feeling before I started speaking, and then I remember speaking, and I remember speaking in a way that, like, I didn't even really have to think about what I was saying, because the question that I was answering, I had embodied and I had lived the answer. And usually when that happens, I don't really have to think too much. I just have to recount my experience. And that's nothing you have to prepare for because of your experience. And so I answered 2 questions. And at the end of the night, I got a couple people that came up to me and was like, you gave really good answers to those questions. And that's when I started to lock in on purpose. And that's when I started to realize that maybe my purpose is to embody and experience things and then come back with wisdom for people, for other people, simply. And that's coming through now for the podcast, for the way I speak on Instagram, and hopefully it turns into even more. But that event really showed me something in a very small way. It wasn't some grand synchronicity, but it was a synchronicity, and it showed me the path to my purpose. So Oz, thank you for the invitation, thank you for the event, and I'm so glad I had that opportunity, and I'm so glad the universe orchestrated that, because purpose had been on my mind very, very heavily. The cocoon phase was me moving into the apartment, me building my highest self apartment, really nestling in there and getting comfortable there. The activation phase was when the deeper work started to happen, when I started to go through ego death and dark night of the soul and explore purpose and have mystical events and synchronicities. And the exit was me coming to the end of my lease, luckily making it to the end of my lease with the help of friends and family. My dark night of the soul started to lift finally, and that dark night was like a very heavy storm cloud over my life. I didn't know when I was going to come out of it. I mean, literally, it's only been 3 weeks. So that period lasted. It didn't last long, hindsight, but I couldn't see the light at the end of the tunnel for a very long time. And it's a synchronicity in itself that it ended right as I was moving back to Shelby, like literally same day almost. I mean, I'm riding down the highway, U-Haul truck is on its way to my dad's house, I'm behind it, turned in my keys, last bit of rent has been paid. I feel great, the sun is out, I'm listening to my friend's song that she just put out. I mean, it was a very good moment, and that's when I realized I was coming out of it. I started to experience just coherence, and not that I wasn't coherent before in terms of my heart and my mind being in sync, but it really started to come back online. I didn't feel so odd in my body, I didn't feel so scattered, I didn't feel so heavy. I left Charlotte with intention, because hindsight is 2020, and I realized shortly after getting back here to Shelby that Charlotte was a metamorphosis for me. Getting there, that friendship that got me there, that moved me into Charlotte initially, even though our friendship didn't work out, it served its purpose. It was supposed to get me to Charlotte, It was supposed to get me into this apartment where I could live alone for 2 years so that I could undergo this entire transformation. And when the transformation was over, when the cocoon phase was over, when I was changing from caterpillar to butterfly and it was time to go, I broke out of my cocoon, came back to Shelby, the dark night lifted, and now there's a phase between when the butterfly comes out of the cocoon and when it can fly. The wings are still wet in that short time frame. And that's where I'm at now, letting my wings dry before I really take flight. And it's such a beautiful analogy because that's exactly what happened, like from getting there to leaving. And I am not the same person I was when I moved into that apartment. When I moved to Charlotte, not even the same person I was 3 months ago. And so, I mean, the journey is really an evolution if you do it consciously. One big theme that really became evident was the meaning of sacrifice, the meaning of self-sacrifice. A lot of people think that sacrifice is giving up something, paying the money, giving up a material thing, giving up your time, letting your dream die so someone else can have their dream. Yeah, but the true meaning of sacrifice is the willingness to let a version of yourself die. And that's the true meaning of sacrifice, because when you let go of an identity, whether that's the victim role, whether that's the role of the good guy or the good girl, whether that's the identity of someone who never fails. I mean, there's tons of identities out there that people attach themselves to. But when you let that go, you're letting go of a version of yourself that was running a narrative. And that's a sacrifice, because when you let those things go, you're stepping into an unknown. And the ego absolutely hates the unknown. Not only your ego, but the nervous system as well. The ego needs a story to stay alive. If you ever notice that you find yourself after an argument, after a relationship, or even in the midst of those things, that your mind is spinning a story about something that never happened, a conversation that was never had, that's your ego. That's your ego trying to maintain a narrative around something, even if you know it's false, even if you know it probably wouldn't happen. I mean, it shows up in your life in a lot of different ways. So when you step into the unknown, that's a sacrifice. That's the ultimate sacrifice. And you will experience a very huge amount, depending on the level of sacrifice, right? A very huge amount of shame, at least in my experience. I experienced a lot of shame, and I still experience a little bit of that. Still don't have a full-time job, not looking. Finances are funny, to say the least. Like, I mean, I have a lot of things going on that the average person would feel ashamed about, and shame comes from the ego, and the ego is a false sense of self, and that alone keeps me from spiraling. That alone keeps me from being down on myself, because it's not real. It's simply not real. And so when you abandon the false things in your life, you have to expect shame to show up, because the ego hates the unknown that you just stepped into.